Satellite coming down in 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, go!
The Battlefield 2042 launch was rough. We know it, and DICE knows it. The first several months after launch were also incredibly shaky. And yet, almost 18 months on, 2042 has come a long way, and objectively speaking, has improved significantly in that time. So much so that now, after the 3.2 patch in late January 2023, even the most staunchly opposed gamers are half-jokingly stating that the game is now finally out of beta. And yet, with Season 4 now beginning and the newly announced Season 5 beyond that, there is still much to do before I, as a Battlefield fan, will feel that this game is complete. When I say complete, let me be clear that I do not mean a perfect game, bug-free, and flowing with content. There are many features that this game cannot accommodate, or simply will never have because of its existing scope and design. We must accept that. However, here is a list of features, game mechanics, and suggestions which I believe are not only achievable for Battlefield 2042, but will give it the feeling of a complete game. To begin, let's talk about minor changes and additions. First, add the assist counts as kill mechanic to 2042. This, of course, is the feature from all Battlefield games since Battlefield 4, which grants the player a kill on the scoreboard if they apply more than 75% damage to an enemy but do not get the kill themselves. Widely praised as a satisfying feature over the years, assist counts as kill rewards players instead of punishing them for doing damage to enemy infantry and vehicles alike. It also encourages teammates to work together and fire on enemy heavy vehicles because they know they might be rewarded with at least one kill even if they don't get the final hit on a full transport. Next, squad tools from previous titles are something which must be added. While this has been recently noted as getting a future pass, I want to be clear that this is a mandatory must-have. These include the ability to kick friendly players from your squad who are not working with you or are just plain bad. Lock your squad with only a few of you to prevent harassment, and join other squads who appear to be playing together. Third, although probably unlikely at this point, I would like to see some form of platoon or clan-based functionality added to the game, even if it was just as basic as being able to apply a clan tag as a prefix to your username. Do I want more? Hell yes! In a perfect world, we would be getting the incredibly detailed and community-building platform functions of BF3 and BF4 Battlelog. But for 2042, this isn't going to happen. Give me a clan tag prefix and I'll be happy. Fourth, given that communities are null and persistent servers seem out of the cards, we need to at least improve the functionality of playing with friends. Currently, if your party of 4 is full and you have more friends who wish to join, these other players need to join each game of the party separately, every single time a new match is searched, and frequently wait in queue. This is unacceptable. Either the squad number needs to be raised to at least 5 players, or multiple 4-man parties should be able to link up on the main menu and be able to search and join the same match together. Fifth, while UI and HUD designs have received updates over the game's lifespan, more is required. Specifically, there are 4 things I would like to see in 2042. 1. I would really like the ability to increase the scale of the minimap on the bottom left of the screen, just as I can do in BF4, BF1, and BF5. DICE learned after the massive backlash from Battlefield 3 when the tiny minimap couldn't be adjusted that this was needed. BF4, 1 and 5 gave us this option to scale up the minimap drastically as well as make it more transparent. Bring this back. 2. For the UI in-game in general, allow players to customize the sight color and size of their target reticles. 3. On the deployment menu, allow players to zoom into the map even a small amount, to allow them to differentiate close and overlapping spawn icons. Oftentimes, one squad mate is in combat but another isn't, and the game makes it nearly impossible to select properly. Other times, this overlaps with other deployment icons such as the transport vehicles or spawn beacons as well, also making deployment difficult. This is greatly exacerbated in the 128 player modes. Allow a minor zoom on the deployment menu to fix it. Going back to the main list and now getting into the more demanding and detailed changes. 6th, the Conquest 64 game mode needs to receive a clear and fundamental pass on the number of vehicles allowed per map. It cannot be a blanket amount across most of the game mode with only 2 variations. There are several maps like Orbital, Breakaway, and Renewal which feature only 1 vehicle allowed from each major pool aside from the light transports. These numbers are completely acceptable, though another tank slot of Renewal might be appropriate. Meanwhile, there are even smaller maps like Noshar Canals, a 5 flag map with double the amount of each vehicle pool. This is nonsensical given its small size, and it's contrary to its original map design, which didn't have anywhere near that many vehicles. Other maps which include this unnecessarily high vehicle pool are Arica Harbor and Valparaiso. Moreover, this brings me to another point. Not every single map in the game needs every single vehicle in the game. Arica Harbor does not need jets or helicopters, plain and simple. And following that change, it no longer needs Wildcats or Sea Rams. We obviously do not have the proper vehicle deployment selection tools available in 2042, nor the map-specific vehicle spawns which inherently balanced past Battlefield maps. But we can limit the overwhelming amount of them running around with far too few players carrying countermeasures. At the very least, smaller maps should have the vehicle count of each category slashed in half. 7th, there needs to be increased and punishing directional damage to vehicles. However, this needs to be done very carefully. Vehicle players, specifically ground armor players, are keenly aware of just how many threats there are to Wildcats and tanks in 2042. Everything from C5, M5 recoilless, javelins, Sundance nades, other ground armor, helicopters, air transports, jets, and of course Liz rockets. While the balancing act of each of these tools is still a work in progress, it should be obvious to any Battlefield player that without some form of directional damage to vehicles, something definitely feels missing, especially after hitting a tank in the rear twice and then watching it drive away. And yet, we cannot allow certain vehicles to be even weaker than they already are. I propose 2 solutions. 1. There will be increased directional damage to the sides and rear, with more being dealt to the rear of Wildcats, Sea Rams, Mavs, Bolts, and tanks, but only from each of these vehicles to each other. Additionally, a direct rear shot from one vehicle to another will now result in an engine disable. No infantry-based counter would be affected. This would keep the infantry vehicle dynamic as it currently is, still needing balance as it does, but introduce a sense of skill and maneuvering sorely missing from armor play in 2042. 2. A final implementation regarding directional damage concerns the M5 recoilless. Recently buffed in 3.2 with increased velocity, completely unnecessary as it was already impressively faster than previous BF titles, it should be reverted to its pre-patch velocity. have a greater in-flight visual effect added, and with regard to this discussion on directional damage, deal a significantly higher amount of damage to the rear and only the rear of ground armor. Only the M5 should receive this buff. However, in turn, due to the offset of the speed reduction, I believe all M5 rocket carriers should receive one additional starting rocket. This is in line with previous Battlefield anti-tank rocket numbers and satisfies DICE's original reasoning for giving it the unnecessary speed buff, which was that the class system would reduce the amount of rockets on the field at a given time. 8th, keeping in line with the discussion on ground armor, let's talk about tanks. As previously mentioned, tanks are on the receiving end of a considerable amount of counters and gadgets. Even with the addition of APS and the turret speed buffs, which were drastically needed, tanks are still difficult and frustrating vehicles. While I could list several changes for tanks to bolster their effectiveness, I will settle for 4 key changes which are both simple and minor in their own right, but hugely needed to improve tank player satisfaction and overall quality. 1. Increase the ability to pivot the tank left or right. It currently suffers greatly in tight spaces and around buildings, and has difficulty avoiding super close enemies running up to them. Increasing the pivot turn speed would also greatly increase maneuverability, sorely needed. 2. Increase the acceleration and deceleration of the Abrams and T-28 by a small but noticeable amount. This would allow tanks to rock back and forth behind cover more effectively, and more importantly, give them a higher chance of reacting to dodge the vast number of rockets coming at them from various sources. 3. Reduce the smoke generated by firing the main gun. Far too often the smoke obfuscates enemy vehicles and players almost as much as the smoke screen would. 4. Slightly increase the velocity of the heavy machine gun. Far too often, the damage of this weapon is hard countered by the combination of its slower rate of fire, the vast distances most tanks have to play on the open map spaces, and the speed of infantry movement. 9th, another vehicle discussion, and one which has been extremely divisive since 2042's launch, the air transport vehicles of the Superhind and Condor. There is much to discuss here, as these vehicles have gone from full-blown, overpowered one-way via its 50mm cannon on the second seat destroying everything, to later having that nerfed, to still being an immensely strong flying tank with too much HP, strong side miniguns, a very powerful 40mm grenade launcher, and a still moderately effective 50mm cannon. It is clear that these vehicles need a nerf. But what is the most effective way to do this without breaking their role? I propose 4 changes to these air transports. 1. Fundamentally, the most divisive ability of each vehicle is the introduction of the second seat weapons, the 50mm and 40mm grenade launcher. A vast number of players firmly believe that these weapons are inconsistent with an air transport vehicle role. In past Battlefield games, the transport helicopters had 2 side miniguns, and that was largely enough to do effective damage when utilized correctly. Given that these vehicles have a vast health pool, repairability, flares, and inside seats allowing for internal repairs, I strongly recommend removing the second weapon seat altogether, while keeping the side miniguns as they are. This keeps it in line as a primarily mobile transport vehicle and reduces the vast frustrations of many players getting killed by it. 2. Despite this nerf of weapons, I would currently keep its existing health pool as it is. Neutered as a major attack vehicle, it still needs a large health amount to traverse the maps of 2042, especially in any 128-player mode. 3. I would add an additional 2 internal seats in the rear of the vehicle, which do not allow players to use any equipment. These seats would exist solely to allow teammates to spawn from the deployment menu and bail out, reducing the frequent frustration of having these vehicles as unspawnable since they become full and players don't drop out. 4. Finally, one thing greatly missing from 2042 is the proper disable and impact physics from previous games. When it gets hit by a rocket, a stinger, a tank shell, whatever, these vehicles should truly be disabled, greatly reducing their speed and rate of climb. Moreover, when a rocket or shell hits one of these vehicles, the impact should be noticeable in the flight physics, causing the helicopter to be pushed off balance and drastically in the opposite direction, making crashes from low flying more common. With that in mind, even though we are keeping its high HP pool, it still is an effective Airbus capable of surviving significant damage, especially with internal engineers. 10th, a server browser for the main 2042 game is never coming, sadly. Additionally, while it has recently been announced that changes are coming in Season 4 to improve matchmaking and make repetitive map encounters hopefully impossible, I still want to take a moment on this topic. One of the most immensely frustrating things about 2042 since day one has been the game selection process. It is limited, buggy, and frequently results in the same awful maps being played over and over. Players cannot see which maps are part of the main or featured playlists, and occasionally just straight up load into the tail ends of game rounds with less than 50 tickets remaining. When it comes to breakthrough, searching for games becomes an exercise in searching for the attacking team, given its vehicle advantage and tendency to be less frustrating. I am pleased to hear about changes coming to this system, but hopefully these include a shorter time between rounds, persistent servers which simply load into the next map in a rotation, and a team shuffling option after every game. 11th. While I am not the best player to fully recommend a list of changes on this topic, it nevertheless needs to be addressed. Jets in 2042 are by far the worst implementation of aircraft design in any Battlefield game. The flight physics are a mess, the countermeasures don't work properly, and the weapons are downright awful. I am not asking for jets to become the powerhouses of previous games like Battlefield 2 and 3. I simply want them to be effective in the right hands, enjoyable to play, and have a high skill ceiling. Great Battlefield pilots in the community have offered significant design changes over the past year, and they are worth looking into for advice on this subject. That being said, here are a few critical recommendations needed to start improving jet gameplay. 1. Jets are trying to autocorrect vertically or automatically straighten themselves out every time turning inputs are released. This makes for super awkward, very imprecise, and drifty aiming overall. This may or may not be related to the very drifty physics of the planes anyway. Either way, this needs to be corrected. 2. Jet models need to be more on the rails and less drifty to prevent frequent crashing while dogfighting or engaging ground targets. This would also reduce head-on angles while dogfighting where one player wouldn't have the advantage yet, but still able to achieve damage. This would also make aiming easier without having to adjust constantly. 3. Pitching down is currently faster than pitching up in both jets, and significantly faster in the Su-57, and allows for easier speed control with afterburner hold, which is ridiculous. This needs to be balanced and prevented. 4. The vehicle disabled mechanic should make a comeback, as this simply adds some depth to fighting. For example, a player can choose to abort a one fight and refocus on something else, with the potential to achieve that kill if the enemy pilot dies within their aircraft when it expires. It also allows a jet that is disabled to allow the pilot to bail somewhere strategic if they want. 5. Jet rocket pods would be a welcome addition instead of the air-to-ground missiles, but rocket pods need to be reworked. Currently in Portal, they only deal noticeable vehicle damage when direct impacting. However, with the drifty model that inherits momentum from the jet and the crazy crosshair impact point prediction, hitting a target anyway is extremely difficult. 6th, air radar is extremely unreliable and flashes enemy targets in seemingly random intervals. Sometimes you lack critical knowledge in crucial moments because of it. This needs to be addressed, and a rescaling option of the minimap would improve this as well. 7. The jet pursuit camera frequently puts your jet model in the line of sight of shooting with the third-person camera crosshair so you can't see where you're aiming. 8. Similarly, the rear camera option frequently blocks all view by placing your jet in front of the screen. 9. You also cannot pitch up at all while using the rear cam, so looking behind you during a dogfight to see the enemy plane could cost you your life. 10. Jet speed control needs to be implemented to balance the two jets. Neither jet should inherently turn faster than the other, and holding the afterburner 24/7 shouldn't determine the winner. In the days of Battlefield 4, a speed of 313 achieved a maximum turn speed, which raised the pilot's skill ceiling overall without completely ruining gameplay. And 11. Jets should reliably be able to spot enemies from higher altitudes, and have the only active 3D spotting in the game, allowing them to track vehicles and infantry for multiple attack runs. One last thing to note. Several of these listed issues, from drifty flight physics, inability to pitch up when in rear cam, a broken rear cam altogether, are fixed and functional features on only the A-10 and Frogfoot attack aircraft, both of which were released well after launch. If these fixes are capable in Portal, please have someone adapt them to the main game. Moving on from jets and back to the main list. 12th, port over and drastically improve the remaining features of Battlefield Portal, including vehicles, weapons, and abilities. This includes the attack jets from Battlefield 3, the TV missile on Battlefield 3 attack helicopters, which right now is completely bugged and ineffective, and the ECM, which should also serve as an alternative to flares. In addition, with regard to bringing things over, let's talk about the forgotten Portal maps. The Exodus Conquest playlist featured the Battlefield 3 maps of No Shark Canals and Caspian Border, as well as the Bad Company 2 maps of Arica Harbor and Valparaiso, both of which were expanded. Yet there are two other Portal maps which lay completely abandoned, those of 1942, El Alamein and the Battle of the Bulge. It's true, El Alamein is terrible, and while Bulge is okay, it really doesn't feel complete compared to the modern maps. The disregard of these maps shows me two things. One, that DICE understands that these maps are not even good enough to bring over to a 64-player Conquest mode in 2042, and two, they clearly didn't understand the maps of 1942. They didn't ask around the still existing community whether there were better 1942 maps to port. There are, by the way, and they made these two specifically because they were easy. Why am I making this point? Because once we reach the end of DICE's support for 2042, we are still left with comparatively few total map options compared to any previous title, even Battlefield 5. And these designs form a solid foundation for rapid content before the end of support, just not in their current form. Each of these maps should be given the Bad Company 2 map treatment. Alter the map boundaries as needed, insert new terrain, trees, buildings, and flags, hell, use only existing 2042 game assets, I don't care, don't even make anything new. But just significantly fill in the empty spaces of El Alamein and the Battle of the Bulge with reasonable content and balanced vehicle numbers. Even copy and paste entire base designs from other maps, and voila, call it a day. You've created two bonus maps for cheap that you can now throw in the Exodus Conquest playlist before you close the door. Just squeeze out as much content as you can. 13th, fix the black zoom bug. This bug, found on ground armored vehicles, frequently appears when zooming in with a tank sight. It is extremely prevalent and probably caused by the shifting camera shutter animation played between zoom distances. What drives me nuts about this one is that it is not just a 2042 bug, but a persistent Battlefield bug since Battlefield 1, also appearing just as often in Battlefield 5. How it has not been fixed from game to game is astonishing. I guess no one at DICE has had this happen to them while testing out vehicles and missing a crucial shot, thanks to it, and dying immediately after. 14th. The light transport vehicles. Similar to the air transports, we need to establish the role of what a transport vehicle is. These are fast, these are maneuverable, these are very lightly armored. These should be the most frequently seen vehicle numbers on the maps, both from deployment and from neutral spawns and flags. And most importantly, these should be lightly armed. Never in any previous Battlefield game has DICE ever considered giving these vehicles 30mm or 50mm cannons, and allow them to not only have such destructive power, but do so from vast distances. In order to reaffirm a formula of balance, completely remove the 30 and 50mm cannons and the 40mm grenade launcher from the Lat-4 Recon Humvees. In addition, add one of these vehicles as a neutral spawn to at least 2 flags per map in the Conquest modes. 15th, reduce the likelihood of all map weather effects in the game by 50%. Rain, the hourglass sandstorm, and most importantly, the tornadoes. Each of these has a bad tendency to become repetitive, unwelcomed, and depending on your platform or hardware, a source of greatly reduced performance. The tornadoes, in particular, must be reduced. Not every round needs to have one. It both diminishes any cool remaining wow factor they bring, and simply have become a nuisance. 16th, let's discuss the endgame. One day soon, DICE will cease support for 2042, and we need to make sure that it doesn't end up like Battlefield 5, dropped with weird playlists and altered map designs which were changed for an event and then left to rot without being reverted to their original formats. 2042 must end with the perfect matchmaking playlist to both optimize player retention and let gamers play the mode that they enjoy the most. To that end, when 2042 support ends, this is what I believe the menu options should be. The option for Hazard Zone should be removed entirely. It is without question a dead game mode as it is now, an experiment which proved unpopular and hugely unsuccessful. Sunset this mode altogether, since as player numbers drop over time, it would be even more of a wasteland. And it would be a better option altogether if newer players didn't even know it existed at all. Conquest. In addition to the Conquest solo co-op option, the only 2 remaining game modes should be Conquest 128 and the 64-player Exodus Conquest playlists, featuring the 64-player version of every map in the game, and hopefully a redesigned 1942 Portal map. These modes should clearly be labeled on the menus and display the complete map rotation included in each. Breakthrough. In addition to the Breakthrough solo co-op option, the only other option here should be a 64-player Breakthrough mode, once again, clearly listing the complete map rotation. Rush and Team Deathmatch. While I personally believe that these modes will continue to die out in 2042, these modes should nonetheless remain in the pool for the few players who want it. And this is it. No other custom modes or experimental gimmicks. Aside from all things Portal, keep the main modes to those which players have gravitated toward. This is my list of features, fixes, and improvements I believe are necessary to turn 2042 into a largely complete Battlefield game, or as much as it can be. Are there others? Oh, most definitely. Skins, attachments, and balancing of vault weapons, mouse input fixes, a number of existing bugs and performance issues remain, additional maps would be great, and hell, just further map improvements. further specialist balancing, the return of all chat, and more Portal content, among others. Keep in mind that this list does not include any other new weapons, specialists, skins, Battle Pass content, or vehicles DICE may add in the future, as these are largely expected. There are plenty of disappointing features and designs in Battlefield 2042, but this list encompasses what I believe is truly possible at this time and in the time remaining, and what I, in the end, would be satisfied with. This game has come a long way since launch, and DICE does deserve some praise for that. Let's push it across the finish line.